Well, right now, let's get caught up on the weather outlook here for the week ahead in the U.S. and what we are watching around the world. Joining us now, Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions here today on the show. Eric, hope you had a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. And let's kick this off. I noticed something you posted on your X account here on Sunday, looking at some of the temperature swings we're going to be watching, and it sounds like some frost potential in the US here this week. So let's start there. What are you seeing, Eric?
Yeah, we got freeze warnings up and down the central and northern plains this morning. We're going to watch that colder air slide into the Corn Belt, central and eastern Corn Belt, Tuesday and Wednesday. Wednesday might be the coolest for the eastern Corn Belt, but a lot of folks, it doesn't matter. I mean, this is about on time. I mean, where I live in Champaign, October 17th is our average first frost date, so we're right about on it. And given how hot for much of the Corn Belt and much of the plains, given how hot it was for most of September, anybody that needed that extra heat got it. And so the crop got to where it should have, made it. And therefore, we're not hearing a whole lot of, negative talk around the risk of these frost events. So, yeah, it's coming in cool. And then just like that, it's going to heat up at the end of the week. There's a storm system that's trying to get caught up in the kind of in the Colorado Rockies, could put down some snow there, and then it may get into the Western Corn Belt. And if it does, I think late this week we could be seeing some better chances of rain in the plains and getting some of that rain into in the form of some storms into the western and central Corn Belt. But I'm not overly confident in it, and the real reason is for the last 45 to 50 days it has been so dry in the midsection of the country that you take multiple events to kind of re-moisten. I don't know if that's a term, but to revive the water in the system, not just the ground and the air, but the whole thing together to get storms to kind of live in that area. And I've got places in the plains right now where soil moisture is in the lowest we've ever observed. I've got places, plains and Midwest. And also on top of that, we've got numerous climate reporting districts that are showing a 132 out of 132, meaning it's the driest last 45 days. When you look at that stretch of days, going back to 1893. So yeah, this is important to see this pattern evolve, but it's got to evolve in a much bigger way to bring moisture up so that we can get some better fall field work in. So yeah, it started with frost, and I took it right into where my biggest concern is, which is dryness, and maybe later on this week some pretty strong winds that'll come through the plains as well. So that's fall. We just make this transition where things get active.
Well, and the dryness, I want to lean in there a little bit more. I mean, that is a significant concern, I would say. I mean, yes, it's giving us good opportunity to get crops out of the field, a rapid dry down in many cases here. But I think about this, and we've talked about this here a couple of times in the last month or so, but looking ahead to winter and into next spring, if this dryness sticks around, this could be an issue for us, Eric.
It could. I mean, even just in the next 10 days, I've got eastern Texas into the eastern Corn Belt with very limited chances of moisture. And even if you do get a chance of rain in there, I mean, we have a little low curling up over the Great Lakes that might bring some lake enhanced rain to a couple of places. But even if you do get the rain, it doesn't bust a drought. It maybe settles the dust. This isn't like a big soaking event. Now, I'm putting a lot of weight on the chances for rain for November, and it's for the reason that you just talked about. We've got to recover some soil moisture before we get into winter. It's hard to recover it in winter. I mean, when it cools down, okay, when it gets cold, the atmosphere just can't contain as much water as it can when it's warm. That's a principle of the atmosphere. So we often don't look for winter to be a drought recovery time period. Now, that's not true down south, but when you get into our neck of the woods, it is. So we then start to put a lot of pressure on spring rains. And this is just kind of ticking off boxes of concern going forward into next growing season, simply because we will have a La Nina this winter. How much of an influence, I don't know, but usually years following La Nina don't tend to be the best in terms of gaining a lot of moisture in the central United States. So what are the hits? Dry now, relying way too much on winter precipitation, which is not smart to do. Depending on spring rains, that's tough as well. I mean, spring can recover. I mean, it did this year, but Jesse, what happened when we recovered a drought from last fall this spring? It rained so much, we were
Mhm.
late putting a crop in. It did a lot of damage. So that's the other thing. And then finally, La Nina. So I just don't like that that's all kind of building up to a worrisome kind of note going into next year. Now, I'd love to be wrong. Boy, that'd be fantastic. And I'd like to see an early start to winter. You know, what's kind of funny is when we tend to make everybody mad with crappy weather, our crops tend to be really happy the next season. So let's see if we can get a bit of a rough start here to winter for people so that the crops are looking good next year. Yeah, all of that. And at the same time, remember the place that's not in drought, which is the Southeast, given the hurricane activity. I mean, it's just been a horrific last 30 days. We had
Mhm.
Francine, Helene. We also had a potential tropical cyclone that hit North Carolina. And then we had, of course, Milton last week. That's an area that would say, hey, can you just send some of that drier weather our way? We need to recover from all of this and start to get the cleanup efforts really going in earnest. So, and you asked some simple questions, but I could just talk about it all day today because this is what's front of mind for me.
Speaking of the Atlantic and the tropics, are we still watching more activity potentially develop as we go through the back half of the month here, Eric?
Yeah, and that's been a worrisome point, I think, all season long is that the ocean is so warm that the normal end of our hurricane season, which is around, the very 1st of November, could we carry that later in the season? I mean, we've had seasons, believe it or not, like 2005, we were still having hurricanes. We called a part of the 2005 season in January of 2006. So we could look at an extended season because of how warm the ocean temperatures are. And I'm watching two areas right now. There's a system out in the middle of the Atlantic. The National Hurricane Center has given a 50% chance of developing. It's not a threat to the U.S. now, but just needs to be monitored all week. And then we have to watch the Caribbean again. I mean, that's where Helene was born. That was where Milton initially started its convection before it got into the Gulf of Mexico. And so I look at those things and just say, I don't think we're done yet with worrying about the tropics. So yeah, good question.
All right. Let's turn our attention to South America too. Wet season sounds like it's officially underway in Brazil. We're seeing some more rain in parts of Argentina, yet farmers have been behind in planting. What's the latest you're seeing in South America right now, Eric?
Yeah, sometimes watching the planting progress is really it's kind of a testament to how much farmers trust a forecast. So you notice that from last week to this week in Mato Grosso, kind of that center west region, there was a jump up in planting. They're at 8% now, last year at 35%. That means that they're counting on the models being correct and the monsoonal rains really beginning to get going in earnest. So every model forecast I've got up there has good monsoonal rains. Some places really wet, like the center west region of Mato Grosso, Goiás, Tocantins as well. And we see dryness in southern Brazil, but that's the area that's been wet up until now. So it's kind of flip-flopped and started to get things going. I would just say this, if, La Nina does end up having a greater influence going forward, we may be talking about the rains, which have been late in arriving, not shutting off or slowing down come January, February, which is when we want to get one crop out and put Safrinha in. That could start to stretch out their crop counter a bit farther, which we do expect to be a bit delayed right now. But the rains are coming. They're forecast to be in, and that's going to be something that'll push the planting progress ahead pretty quickly.
Anything else you're watching around the world here this week, Eric?
My main focal point right now is the Gulf of Alaska. And if you want to know where this story is being written, I think it's being written this fall in the Gulf of Alaska. So here's the big idea. We talked all about the stresses of the water in the midsection of the country. If you can take the troughs that have been living in the Gulf of Alaska and put them into British Columbia to California, like the whole West Coast, we'll be done worrying about water. That'll push everything to the east. That'll invigorate the systems to pull moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico. We'll get into a really soggy late autumn, snowy start to December. And then all of a sudden we don't have this worry. If that doesn't happen, then I think we'll be talking about the same things over and over every time we talk on Monday for a while.
Well, folks can stay on top of the weather on your website, agweather.com, ag-wx.com for more. Eric Snodgrass, Nutrient Ag Solutions. Always good to talk with you, sir. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
Yep, sounds good.